Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show. I've got a special treat today. An old friend of ours, Ted Balaker, who has produced some great movies like Little Pink House and can anyone take a joke? Right, I've got that right.
Yeah, can we take a joke? Yeah, we went through a couple iterations.
That right.
We said
That right.
You got the beginning and the end right. That's all I care about.
Ted, I mean, I remember seeing something. I mean, this is a long time ago, completely unrelated topic, but there was a study done that said if you misspell words, but you get the first and last letter right, most people won't notice it. Right?
That's true. Yeah, I think so. There you go. You nailed it then.
Can we take a joke? Of course, Ted's done a lot of great stuff. He was over at Reason for quite a long time. Now, though, he's got his own tent up, the Shiny Herd Substack, which you just started, right, Ted?
Just started, yeah. This Thursday. It is shiny in that it's new as well. Yeah, very new.
And we got a lot to talk about here too. And you've been taking a look at what's been going on at the Sundance Festival and some other film festivals about the openness to messages in some of these film festivals, and this is becoming a real problem in terms of the creative freedom within the film entertainment industry. Your first Shiny Herd Substack, other than the introduction, is why you'll be watching fewer problematic movies and why that's a problem, I should add. Ted, tell us a little bit about what you're seeing and what the dangers are here.
Yeah, well, like you mentioned, I lead it with that article, and it focuses, as you mentioned, on the Sundance Film Festival, which folks may know is perhaps the shishiest around. There may be others like Cannes or TIFF that could lay claim to the most elite film festival. But what's important here is that it's not just a place for film snobs. And I love independent film. That's what I watch most of the time. That's what my wife and I tend to make. But what happens at these places like Sundance affects what we watch on Netflix, Prime Video, in movie theaters, because these elite film festivals are actually these days mostly buyers markets. So it's less about let's have complicated conversations about film like you would find maybe at a film school, although maybe a film school 20 years ago or something. And it's more about let's sell this product. And so these festivals are kind of a pipeline to Netflix, one of the pipelines, I should say. And what we've seen throughout the years, especially since 2020, is that they have become more reluctant to feature films that have what they would call problematic content. Now, in my article, I go through the difference between what's controversial and what's problematic, because my article refers to Variety, the trade publication, and there it was interesting because the author there framed the issue as film festivals are steering clear of controversial content. And what I pointed out is like, no, they're not steering clear of controversial content per se. They love controversy as long as it offends the right people and doesn't offend the wrong people. So, for instance, at the very last minute, they allowed a feature documentary called Justice, which goes through the accusations against Supreme Court Justice Kavanaugh again. And according to reviewers, it brought forth no new revelations. These reviewers, who themselves are very left-leaning, called it basically a non-event. And you have to say, well, this was very controversial to certain parts. This movie, many people in America would find this movie very controversial. And Sundance allowed it at the last minute too. It's very, very difficult to get into Sundance, and to get an invitation at the very last minute, you've got to be a very special film, or so you would think. And so this film is controversial, but it's not problematic because it's because it annoys and offends the right people and steers clear of annoying and offending the wrong people. You have to ask yourself: would Sundance make such special provisions for an equally good film about the Kavanaugh controversy had it been from a different point of view, one perhaps more sympathetic to Justice Kavanaugh?
Yeah, or I mean, we could take a look at, films that might have something critical to say about Joe Biden, right? Or films that might have something critical to say about Barack Obama. I mean, if it was Donald Trump, it would get in. I don't know that it wouldn't get in if it was something about Biden or Obama, but I suspect that there'd be less inclination for this. And this is, I mean, this is actually kind of a subtle issue, and I think you underscore this here too. Is that there's still no shortage of materials for people to watch at these film festivals. There's still, I think you said about 100 feature films at Sundance, and these other festivals will have fewer than that because, but there's still plenty of feature films to put on. The difference, though, is that the perspectives of these are getting narrower and narrower, and I would argue that the number of films at these festivals tends to obscure the fact that what they're actually getting is less in terms of cultural reach.
Exactly. So on the one hand, these films would be very diverse. They come from filmmakers who look very different from each other, from all over the world, on lots of different topics. But when it comes to hot button topics, a lot of the ones that are most important these days and most talked about, everything from environmental issues like climate change, certainly to racism, sexism, all the issues that you may be uncomfortable to bring up in a dinner conversation. Those are often the ones that are at the heart of what our most pressing problems are. And our inability to speak frankly about those issues means that it's going to be a lot harder to fix any problems that have to do with those issues. So this is not just, on the one hand, it's very easy to frame this as, oh, it's just an elite film festival filled with independent film buffs, and so it's not that big of a deal. But that's what people said about colleges for many years. Right. And when we released "Can We Take a Joke," that was in 2016. It feels like a completely different world, because we actually initially had a very hard time pitching that film to distributors. Eventually, Samuel Goldwyn picked it up, and it turned out really well. But initially, they were saying, "Oh, come on, this stuff. It sounds crazy, of course, but it's just going to be at a few college campuses, and it's never going to spill over into society at large." Well, we all know how that story ended. It's not only did it spill into society, it keeps spilling and spilling. And these film festivals are just so much like colleges these days in the way that they address issues, in the way that they kind of have a skin deep version of diversity, where they're really interested in diversity of gender, of race, of national origin, and so forth. But you talk about diversity of ideas, diversity of viewpoints, and no, they can't have that. If it's about climate change, it must toe this line. If it's about America, it must toe this line. Now, there may be some variations within that, but it's sort of like the New York Times. For every one article that they have with kind of a heterodox point of view, there are many more that support the kind of monoculture worldview.
Well, also, Ted, I mean, there's another factor going on here, which is that how do you get financing for films that have heterodox points of view? And I mean, it's one thing, we certainly can talk about how the film festivals are restricting entry of films that actually get made. But I mean, that sends signals about where people are going to put money into these films, because especially, studios can afford to throw money at stuff. When people are financing things independently, that's difficult to do. It's not easy to do. Sometimes you can be so independent that you just fund it yourself, then you can do whatever you want. But what kind of impact is this having on the funding for independent films that tell heterodox points of view. I mean, you've made them. So
Yeah, no,
you've got some experience on this.
yeah, it's a great point, Ed, and it's one that's often overlooked. Again, a lot of these issues are very, very important, but they're easy to overlook, especially in the what I consider to be the rather annoying framing of cancel culture these days. We tend to really overlook how pernicious it is, and a lot of the really bad stuff is happening uh, underneath the water level, so to speak. So it really is kind of the rest. We're talking about literally, not literally, the tip of the iceberg. But to the point about independent film financing, yes, my wife and I, that's, we've had our own production company since 2011, and that's kind of our bread and butter. We finance these we raise money for them independently, which is always difficult, but we've had a pretty good track record of doing that. But the kicker is that if there is an even fundraising for a film is very, very difficult. But if there's an even trickier piece of the puzzle, it's distribution. So you can fund the movie, but then how are people going to see it? And if, like my wife and I, we don't, what our motto is making important ideas entertaining. And another thing that we like to say is don't just preach to the converted. We're very proud of the fact that we've had movies that touch on topics like free speech and private property rights, and that they've been able to engage people across the political spectrum. So if you want to do what we're doing, distribution is very, very difficult. So even if and when you are able to raise 6 figures or 7+ figures for a film, you have to figure out, well, how is it going to get to audiences? And in the early during the early pandemic times, I was very immersed in COVID and lockdowns, and I was horrified of, like you were, what was going on. And I'm like, this is, I'm a filmmaker. We do documentaries as well as narratives. This, I want to follow this. I had contacts in Sweden, friends there who, as you probably recall, Sweden was taking a very different approach.
Right.
And so I was very keen on trying to raise money to make a COVID documentary that would have a heterodox point of view. But I realized early on that the larger film world would make it very, very difficult, such that if we raised the money, I couldn't go to our investors and say we have a good chance of reaching mainstream America, because it just didn't seem like that. I was reading the trades, and there was every once in a while a new COVID documentary was in development, and it was kind of like, of course they're not all the same, but they kind of, again, tend to, in general, reinforce the same monoculture lines. And that was very, very frustrating for me, because nobody will ever, except your listeners and us and a few other people, will never know about that documentary that might have been. And
right.
It could have been on Netflix, and those other ones, if they're good, they should certainly be made as well, but it shouldn't be just those. And that's what's happening in the film world. Is, again, I go back to the universities, because the parallels are stark and they're frightening. Just as we have a lack of any kind of viewpoint diversity on most college campuses, we have that certainly in the film world as well. And it's really a shame.
Well, and this is actually kind of antithetical anyway to the entire idea of independent film, right? I mean, independent film, at least in its beginning, and really as it matured, was the whole point of that was to tell heterodox stories, was to tell stories that the studios weren't telling, or that the mainstream media weren't telling. And in the early days, that expressed itself in ways that are fairly mainstream now. LGBT stories, right? The LGBT stories were big in independent films, because you couldn't get, a Billy's Hollywood Kiss made by the studios at that point in time. I'm trying to think of the one that I saw, and this is many years ago, Chutney Popcorn, which was a very much a grassroots independent effort by by the woman who actually started. She started it, directed it, and stuff like that, and just telling this, basically a autobiographical story of her lesbian lifestyle. And you couldn't make, studios wouldn't touch stuff like that, and so the whole genre emerges out of the need to tell stories that aren't being told. And now, I mean, from what you're describing, it sounds to me like this is just an auxiliary of the same stories that mainstream media is telling already. I mean, it's stultifying, if you will. I mean, it's just there's no purpose there other than to just reinforce the dominant narrative. I think that's a betrayal of what independent film is supposed to be.
Oh, you're absolutely right. And I certainly agree. It's very troubling, especially, this is my livelihood. This frustrates me on a daily basis. And my wife and I are always trying to find ways to kind of thread the needle to work around what this is. And that's part of the reason I started Shiny Herd, the Substack, because I saw that an industry that had long been narrow-minded, it became almost downright suffocating after 2020. And I've been hemming and hawing about what to do since 2020, really before that. But after 2020, it was just so despicable that I thought, like, I have to, there's so much that's going on that isn't being reported. And people don't really understand the full extent of really the censorship that's going on. There's a great chill that's going through the film industry, and it reverberates through the whole culture. It's the same chill that we feel in academia, in corporate America, in journalism. And you're exactly right that the independent film world has betrayed its purpose, much like how academia has betrayed its purpose, to the point, and I mentioned this in my article. You mentioned LGBT films. Of course, that's something like every festival is very keen on that genre these days. But right. Even that, the rules are being rewritten so that this gay Latino filmmaker tells Variety that film festival programmers rejected his newest film, it's called Waking Up Dead, because the gay protagonist exhibits transphobia initially, and then it's a movie, there are character arcs, people change, and then I haven't seen the film, but apparently then comes around to a different point of view. The programmers didn't like the fact that a gay person was depicted as transphobic, because why? Gay people can't have those points of view, those biases either.
There's a whole group of lesbians and bisexuals who oppose transgender ideology. They even have a derogatory name for them, TERFs, transphobic, forget what the East is.
Trans-exclusionary radical feminists, yeah.
Trans-exclusionary radical feminists, right. Not transphobic, trans-exclusionary radical feminists, right? Yeah, of course that's a point of view. And there's an argument to be made there, because the radical feminists are saying you can't, there's no definition to feminism if there's no definition to woman. I mean, you may not agree with that,
but that point of view will not be, I mean, I'm not going to say it's never going to be allowed, but it's much more difficult. You're far less likely to see that point of view. These days, I would say, certainly at these elite film festivals, good luck finding that point of view.
Right. So you've got another documentary in the works here. We got to talk a little bit about that before we bring this to an end, because it's based on a book by Greg Lukianoff. We know Greg over at Fire, and Jonathan Haidt, called H-A-I-D-T, folks, just in case you're not, I think it's pronounced Haidt.
Haidt, yeah.
Jonathan Haidt. Yeah. Well, unfortunate pronunciation. Sorry about that. The Coddling of the American Mind. And this is a documentary. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing with the Coddling of the American Mind.
Yeah. So any listeners who are familiar with the best-selling book, it's the same title. It's the same. I would say it's covering similar ground, except that it's more of a story told through the eyes of various really extraordinary 20-somethings that we have encountered. So we tell their stories. Now, Greg Lukianoff tells his story, his brush with suicide, and how that led him to see a lot of the awful things that were going on college campuses, and how he connected with Jonathan Haidt, who's a social psychologist at NYU, and they made this book that really made a big splash. And what they found is that on college campuses and elsewhere, adults are teaching young people to think in ways that make them miserable, to think in ways that make them anxious, depressed, and even suicidal. So that Gen Z, these are not millennials. A lot of those of us who are older than millennial, we tend to think, oh, they're all, if they're younger, they're millennial. No, there's this other generation called Gen Z, even younger than millennials, and they are extremely fragile. And they have very alarming rates of anxiety, depression, and suicide. And these rates of anxiety and depression really shot up round about 2012 or so. And this Jonathan talks about this in the book and in the film. It's an increase that we haven't seen before. It's very alarming. So anyone who is in Gen Z, or maybe you have children or grandchildren in Gen Z, I'm very slow to be alarmist about things, but you have to sound the alarm. If there really is a fire, then an alarm is warranted. And I think in this case there is a fire, and the alarm is warranted. So the film talks about if young people, or anyone really, holds these harmful ideas that are taught in colleges and elsewhere, ideas like you are fragile, ideas like always trust your feelings, or us versus them, that the whole of existence is a struggle between good people and evil people. If you hold these ideas in your head, you're very likely to be miserable. And if you shed these ideas, you're much, much likelier to be happy. So in some sense, it's a movie about happiness, how to be miserable and then how to be happy. So we talk to young people who have different experiences going into kind of the progressive woke worldview and turning around and coming out the other way. And they talk about what it was like. These are very, very wonderful young people. I don't think any of them would be, there are one young lady is from Uganda, another young man from Nigeria, India. We have some couple American kids, one with autism. And I bring up their backgrounds like that to show that the things that are going on in college are often done not exclusively for, but college administrators have a special interest, let's say, in Black and brown students and handicapped students. And if what's going on in college is making even them miserable, and I would say especially them miserable, not just miserable, but anxious, depressed, and oftentimes suicidal, then we have a major, major problem on our hands. So it's the movie talks about how to reverse this problem on college campuses and elsewhere. And basically it shows a way through these stories from these young people, how even if you do get trapped in this harmful way of thinking about the world, you can escape. There is hope. These young people have done it, and others can as well.
Well, I'm looking forward to this. I mean, I'm not sure if you have a schedule for it to be released, because like you said, sometimes these are difficult issues to work through, but I'm hoping it's going to be sometime soon, because I think that this is a really urgent matter that requires a lot of attention.
Yeah, we're right now the movie's done. We're in the midst of figuring out distribution, and like I write in my Substack, now it's a very perilous time to be releasing this type of film, because a lot of the gatekeepers who would ordinarily, even just a few years ago, embrace something like this, maybe, and it's hard to read their minds, of course, but maybe much more reluctant to. Once it does find distribution, I think even if just a fraction of the many, many news outlets that covered the book, if they cover and pay attention to the film, I think we have, something quite large could be on our hands here. And I hope that it will help to get people to think again about what's going on college campuses, not just those of us who are already worried, but I'm hoping that it will resonate even with college administrators, people at high schools, because it starts at high schools and earlier as well, and frankly, a lot of just parents. I'm a parent too, and it's very easy to slip into this mindset of like your child is fragile and we have to bubble wrap everything that he does. So we're not, without blame as well. But certainly once we know more details with the film, we'll let you know, and we'll let everybody know.
Well, I'm hoping you'll let me know, because I want to get you back on here to talk about it when it's ready to go.
Of course, we'll let you know.
All right, good. Well, I'm glad to hear that. I'll even try to get the name of the film right.
No, you did.
Eventually.
Yeah. Can we take a joke? That was ages ago. That was pre-2020. It feels like a completely different world. So,
all right. So that is The Coddling of the American Mind, and hopefully be coming out soon in some place near you. But you can go right now to shinyherd.substack.com. That's shiny and then herd, HERD.substack.com, where you can get Ted's brand new Substack. And I'm going to add it to my feed reader, and I hope that you're going to be updating it quite a bit. And we're going to keep
Thursdays and Thursdays. Yep.
Yeah, we're gonna keep getting you back here to talk about these things.
Sounds good. Thanks for the plug. And I should mention that, I will be providing updates regarding Coddling of the American Mind on Shiny Herd. So any of your listeners who are interested in keeping up with what's going on with the Coddling of the American Mind, just head to Shiny Herd and you will be up to date.
All right, Ted Balaker, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Ed. Always a pleasure.
Stay tuned for one last message from the Ed Morrissey Show coming up right now. Now that the political infighting is over and the sausage is being made in the House, it's time for Republicans to unite with one cause and fight back against Joe Biden and his radical administration. The GOP has promised to investigate Biden family corruption, the border, big tech censorship collusion, the origins of COVID, the FBI, and intel agencies' attacks on the American people, and more. And it's time to hold them to those promises. Here at Hot Air, we won't let up on holding them accountable. We unapologetically fight back against the radical left and squishy rhinos in Congress who fail the people. We bring you the truth and go to war against Biden's woke communist agenda. But we need your help. By becoming a VIP for hotair.com, you can help us in this battle for our country. Just look at the House Democrats leader, Hakeem Jeffries. He's another divisive radical leftist, and his communist Sesame Street speech proves it. If Republicans don't halt the Biden agenda and conservative media fails to hold them accountable, it could mean the end of our great country. Join us in the fight. Become a Hot Air VIP member or a VIP Gold member today, and use the promo code SAVEAmerica to receive a 40% discount on your membership. Stand with us and fight to save America. We will never give up. And thank you very much.